Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastamavitvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be full of illumination. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So after some time, we are continuing our study of this most profound Upanishad, this Katha Upanishad. And so because the study is interrupted a little bit, it's necessary to review a few salient characteristics of this Upanishad. The whole Upanishad is cleverly constructed to reflect our spiritual life and spiritual progress, how we view the world, and what is the underlying truth about it. And so we notice that when the teaching begins at the request of an earnest seeker, that is in the form of Nachiketa, embodying a youth with all the energy and enthusiasm of youth, it first of all tells us we have to have the same kind of enthusiasm. This enthusiasm is not natural to us, and it requires us to engage in a certain amount of wisdom or discernment, looking at this universe as it is, and not thinking that there is anything more beyond it, just superficially interpreting it. Then the temptation is that we are caught up in a series of misadventures that results really in a great deal of confusion and pain. That's the world we find ourselves in. It's not necessarily an exaggerated negative position. It's just a fact of it. And Buddha puts it much more bluntly in his Four Noble Truths, that this world is really painful existence with a few opportunities here and there for joy and happiness. And so there are always two ways of thinking. There are always two ways of deciding. There is an element of at least apparent free will that says we can go in one direction or the other direction. And if we're not discerning about the direction we take, if we're not discerning about the individual choices from moment to moment that we apply, then we have to live with the consequences of each path. What is described not only in the Katha Upanishad but also in the Bhagavad Gita as a path which is preferable to us, and that means which does not lead to intrinsic pain, and a path which will induce pain even though it's disguised as joy and pleasure. There's no doubt that life, if pursued according to the senses, is a pursuit toward pleasure. There's nothing intrinsically wrong in that, provided we understand what are the consequences of our internal actions, that is thought, that expresses itself as external movements. And so the Katha Upanishad gives us these two ways of thinking, and that results in two ways of behavior, because repeated thinking will produce a behavioral aspect within us, a habit level. And the more we practice that, the more endorse the habit level, for good or ill, the more we express a kind of personality which can be something like an open blessing channel, giving others joy and comfort, a spirit of generosity and service, or a narrow-mindedness, something like a miserly attitude that says, let all this be mine. So the question then arises in the Katha Upanishad. So far, we've described a moral pursuit, good and bad. I'm reviewing this. This is something we reviewed probably last time. So if we describe these two pathways as a product of merit and demerit, or good and bad, plus and minus, light and shade, then is there something that is very different from that? It is separate from that. Something that is different from a causal law, different from time, different from motion, different from study. And then curiously enough, Yama describes this mystic symbol Om. And from this, we are able to gather that there is something like an eternal self, an eternal entity that has the capacity to see, to review, that has the capacity to discern, capacity to choose, capacity to observe. And then what is the way to discover this? Well, the way is to purify the mind in such a way that there's a matching movement from this divine self, and it's phrased in whom the self chooses, something like a doctrine of divine grace. So we are assured that whatever small effort we make as an individual, there's a corresponding overwhelming matching movement toward us, and is tuning the mind into the glory of this entity that really is called spiritual practice. And so that means that there seems to be two selves. The entity that does not move, called Atman, literally self, and that living thing that seems to be a living thing, a living life, something with a history, something with accumulation of experiences, and that we call Jiva. When one identifies with the other, we call it Jiva. And then Yama gives us the beautiful example that we find even still in the Bhagavad Gita, the parable of the chariot. That for such a machine to operate, a number of different components are there. And we can use this analogy very usefully to understand at least the principle of it. But as we know, having a principle without the necessary practice becomes a problem for us. Very often we think of abstract ways of dealing with things and we put it under the label of philosophy and we leave it there. But if we leave it there, then we are stuck. It's just theoretical, it's just intellectual, that's all. So what is the method? Well, things didn't arrive all of a sudden. The modern theory of evolution tells us that there's a gradual unfoldment. In fact, the term evolution means unfolding. Charles Darwin was very careful not to overuse this term evolution. It was people thereafter that brought out this term evolution. Now we're stuck with this biological evolution without understanding its etymological origins. That is, it's an unfolding. And the reason why we are reluctant to use it in the book Origin of the Species, descent through modification, is because if you say that this whole series of changes is an unfoldment, then the inference is something is there to unfold. Something like the potential tree that sits within a seed. And as the Katha Upanishad itself unfolds, this example of a tree is used to great effect. And then we go on to what is this individual self? Well, it is something like a city, all organized along the same lines as a city. The individual self is a city with 11 gates, and we went through that. It belongs not to the individual, it belongs to an entity who is unborn. All the things that we are observing, all the activities within a city, so many changes are there. Well, the last week I was able to review some of the childhood places where I grew up. And the whole thing is changed beyond recognition. Supposing I hanker on to the past, then I'll be extremely depressed. If supposing I acknowledge, no, change is not only necessary, but change is the natural order of things. Things change. And to accept the change by reviewing it, something like a military man that stands on a platform and watches an array of soldiers going past and takes a salute. In this same way, there is a witness which is there. And when we feel that, when we resort to that, when we withdraw into that space of poise, as it were, we'll find peace descends. And it is not that this is in any way exclusively immanent or exclusively transcendent. Katha Upanishad makes us very well aware that it is both, and naturally deals with the subject of death. Of course, this whole thing is about death. It is no error that Yam is the lord of death. Now, since time immemorial, we can find evidence, and also it's logical, that amongst very, very primitive man, let's say living in a cave-dwelling existence, using very carefully crafted stone tools, used for cutting, used for chopping, used for sourcing food. Taking a flint such as obsidian and making sharp edges, it becomes as effective, if not more, than a steel instrument. They would have noticed a number of things. The first thing that we would notice is that there is daylight and nightfall. In the early morning, we see that the sun rises. We see at a certain time it sets and darkness sets in. One of the greatest discoveries of man was fire. By fire, man was able to see the dancing shadows on the cave wall. By the light of the fire, man was able to communicate stories, perhaps associated with these dancing shadows. With the light of fire, man was able to modify his diet and survive the long winters. But it must have occurred to him that there's a drama being enacted, not just a regular thing every day, but changing throughout what we now register as a year. And a year is a solar year, registered by the action of the sun. Here in Ireland, we have a very ancient monument, something like probably around about 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids. And it's very clear that these great mounds, which are called, unfortunately or fortunately, burial mounds, is just a guesswork about their function. But they all have one thing in common. They're all orientated toward the sun in one way or the other, at different times and seasons of the year. Let's say the winter solstice, summer solstice. It is very, very clear, even from diagrams that are used and patterns, that the sun becomes a symbol of this birth, life, and death. The very natural thing for ancient man to find all the answers to their most profound questions in the sun. Because the sun, we can't reach up and touch it. The sun provides us with warmth and life. And when man goes into the agricultural aspect of his life, we can see how seasons and the presence of the sun is vital for growth. An early man would have noticed this. We're going back thousands and thousands of years. Some may say even millions of years. They must have wondered how life is not a perpetual thing. They must have wondered, where does somebody go to when the eyes close and the breath gets withdrawn? Where does somebody go to? And today, this is still the same question. When there is a death in a family, the first question, where does this person go to? Of course, tradition, theology, and so on, and doctrine may tell us that there's a post-mortem condition. Supposing we have faith in that, it still has a doubt. The doubt is it a good place or a bad place? There was a story of the engineer who mistakenly was sent to hell after his demise, and they made an error, and he went to hell, and he thought, in an engineering way, this is not suitable. This place needs air conditioning. This place needs an elevator. This place needs all the modern comforts that a clever engineer can provide. And then after a while, God and Satan have a dialogue. How are things going down there? Oh, very good. We just employed an engineer, and look, everything is nice and comfortable down here. Oh, no, wait, look into the books. That engineer should have been here. Please send him here. Oh, no, we can't do that. Yes, I command it. No, he's too useful to us down here. In that case, I'll sue you. You can't do that either. All the lawyers are sitting here in the hell. So we have this very funny way of looking at the afterlife. And this funny way of looking is often taken really seriously. But the question of birth, life, and death, and what is the destiny when this mortal coil gets shuffled off, is addressed very, very bluntly. Just to review how it is addressed. The purport really of it is this. Every thought movement that we make registers itself in the unconscious area. That acts as a suction and draws things to us. It is a causal law. We call this karma. And this causal law operates, whether we like it, whether we don't, that it is extremely potent because all the effects that we are experiencing is a result of this causal law. So while our intention may be honorable, that we want some good somewhere, still, what makes it causal is if it's orientated toward this misunderstanding, this mistake about our identity, then naturally our identity continues, and this we call rebirth. So it gives scope for the rewards of our actions, all the money that we accumulated, as it were, in our life, we spend in a post-mortem condition, and we come back in a suitable matching condition. But here's the catch. We continue our journey. We don't stop. And it's the same journey toward the same destination. And that destination is to settle the question of, who am I? What am I? What is that entity that remains when all the other things die off? So the Katha Upanishad then will go on to, and the second section, and the second section within that, and the stanza is the 11th stanza. And no doubt we have reviewed this, but it's worth going through it again because it highlights something that man has had in his mind since these early days, the dawn of time, when the sun was very significant. And this is understood just as a sun, the eye of the whole world. We can use some poetic imagination and refer also to the Upanishads that view the two eyes up in the sky, as it were, one the sun and one the moon. Then we get a more accurate idea of the cosmicism of existence. So it is the eye, and the eye that sees is simply taking the photons emitted from the sun. And then we can see the world in front. In this same way, the sun is seen as something like an eye. And so just as the sun, which is the eye of the whole world, is not tainted by the physical eye catches the photons, and the sun is not affected in any way. It freely gives it. We are borrowing all our vision from the sun, all those photons. And it is not as if we are doing it now. We're all dealing with the world as it was 8 minutes away. 8.5 minutes is the time it takes for the sun's rays to reach the eye. And none of the external defects that the eye sees, none of the aberrations, none of the ups and downs, none of that is affected by the sun. In fact, in our ignorance, we can have a nuclear war and blow the entire earth up. It would be unfair to ask the sun, please tell me now, why did you cause this? How did you sit there impersonally and observe the whole thing happening? Well, there's no connection. The sun beams, and we make use of the sun's rays or otherwise. So similarly, the self, that is but one in all beings, is not tainted by the sorrows of the world. It, being transcendental, the actual passage goes like this: Suryo yuta sarvalokasya chakshur na lipyate chakshuse bahya dosha ekastata sarva bhutanta atma na lipyate noka dukkena bahyaha. And this verse, of course, admits the reality of the pain of the world. It doesn't say we don't acknowledge it. Very often, the Vedanta philosophy is accused of not being in touch with feelings, being so impersonal and saying, it's all illusion or something. No. The verse admits the reality of the pain of the world, but desires that it touches the Supreme Self, that is our own inner being. And that solves the problem of pain. And so the form which the Supreme assumes are different. It's not its modifications, but they are the manifestations of its possibilities. If you were to say, what is our motto here at the Area Vedanta Society? We might say, infinite possibilities. The Supreme Self is unaffected by the pain of the individual selves, because the pain of the individual self is due to its identifying itself with this psychophysical world. And the psychophysical world acts as a vehicle, or don't forget the chariot. The individual ego makes a confusion between this individual self and what is not self, and therefore discernment is the primary practice. But the Supreme, on the other hand, doesn't suffer because it's not subject to ignorance. It doesn't identify itself with any of the accidents to which the various psychophysical vehicles are subject, because the psychophysical has various parts and there are conditions for it to operate in. It is intrinsically not free. So that ignorance, I'm reading now the commentary, Shankaracharya's commentary contained in this 8 Upanishads. That ignorance does not really inhere in oneself. And then it uses these famous examples. Just as the snake, the silver, the water, and the dirt superimposed on a rope, a mother of pearl, a desert, and the sky, respectively, do not in reality exist in the distortions of the rope, etc. So it tells us that this world is something like not exactly an illusion. We can't exactly say that because Maya is inscrutable. But this term Maya tells us something. Whatever you measure has its limitations. And if we think that the superimposed entity is the reality, then our behavior will not be correct and will not be revealing. We won't get any peace of mind. So then the question is, what is this world? Today's thought is worth reading. What is world? Why does it turn? Even if we didn't think that this earth is a turning, rotating thing, even if we didn't think that the whole Milky Way is rotating, even if we didn't think that there was movement within the whole universe, still we can see the turn of dawn, day, night, and dawn again. We can see this birth, life, and death. We can see all this circularity going on, a cyclical universe. So the question is it old school house to learn? You find many people say that don't worry about this world. This world is a place where we learn the hard lessons. That's why we are here. As if there's a cosmic schoolmaster sitting in the clouds saying, for better or ill, I'm going to teach you a lesson. So is it such a thing? where strictly lessons are taught in arduous classes that life has brought? Is it a place where there are Tao pronouncements are given by clergy from a hellfire driven? Is it out of fear that we operate? Seeing the world as punishment? That's some people's explanation, corrected by our school placement. And then a different approach can be adopted with a different question. What if world is a circus ring where we clowns go tumbling? But why do we behave as such is the next question. Because we love to tumble much. Now, these are not my ideas. This comes from the humor and explanatory capacity of Swami Vivekananda. When we get tired, we will quit when we have had enough of it. Then frivolity will have no need, as wind blows on the tumbleweed. So let me clap my hands with glee for God and home and country. This entertaining cloudy realm has steady hand at vessel's helm. This was basically the reply to the question, why are we here? Why is life so painful? In a conversation with Miss Bell that Swami Vivekananda had. So let us see that this life is, when we see this life in a clearer perspective, then the relativity perception as a principle kicks in our favor. So they, that is the substances that we see and the superimposition on that, they are not tainted by those faults, namely the rope, namely the mother of pearl, and the mirage, and so on. For they are outside the notions that's falsely superimposed. And similarly, in the same way, people, after having superimposed on the self the false notions of three things: action, I act; agent, it is through me; and the fruit, these rewards are mine. Like the snake on a rope, experience the misery of birth, death, and so on. Consequence on that superimposition. But this glorious self, this divine entity, though it is the self of all, not just within you individually, is not tainted by the sorrows of the world arising from this false superimposition. Why is that? It's because it's outside. For just like the rope, etc., it is extraneous to the superimpositions of false notions, outside in the sense of different, separate. Then what about peace? Are we all looking for peace? That's all very well in principle, but how do we get peace? Peace is one of the supreme values of today's modern world. Having experienced in the last century, by now in the last century, over 100 years ago, a devastating war where millions of people unnecessarily perished, followed very shortly by a Second World War. Peace, the United Nations was built, and peace is a primary concern. Even though we don't seem to get it either collectively on this planet, nation to nation, or individually. If we can't get it individually, how can we expect to get it collectively? And so, how do we get this peace? Eternal peace is for those, and not for others, who are discriminating. That is, the discernment is necessary about things outside, as it were. But then realization is a movement within, and the two have to match up. So the eternal peace is for those and not for others who are discriminating and who realize in their hearts, that is, deep, deep inside them, deep within, him who, being one, the controller and the inner self of all, makes a single form multifarious. This whole phrase, internal, inner controller, that is the entity that really is controlling. The one control of all, the inner self of all things, who makes his one form manifold. So to those wise people who perceive him as abiding in the innermost heart, To them is eternal peace or bliss, but not to others. So this phrase, Vasi, controller, Ekavasi sarva bhutanta atma, ekam bijam bahudaya karoti, tam atmastham ye nu pashanti, dhirastisham sukham shashvatam nektarisham. That one, that in controller. A beautiful passage. We also find it there in the Untitled Upanishad, copiously used in the 4th section there, 24th or 4th stanza there. And then we also find it in the Shvetashvara Upanishad as well. So we can look to other traditions to emphasize this point. Hereby know we that we abide in him and he in us, because he hath given us of his spirit. This is the 1st John 4:13. And then the one eternal amid the transient, the conscious amid the conscious. This question of consciousness is an important subject today, but people interpret it as the external consciousness and align it with the neurological faculty of the brain. But here we are told that the conscious is amid the conscious, the one amidst the many who grants their desires. The Supreme grants the desires of many. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, other things will be added to thee, comes immediately to mind in relation to this. Let us have a look at this. So this eternal peace is for those and not for others who have a discriminating mind and who realize in their hearts him whom, being the eternal among what? Among the ephemeral, among the things that not only change, but vanish as well. That's a very important concept. It's not just the changing nature of something, it's the disappearance and reappearance of things that we hardly notice. The consciousness among the conscious, that alone dispenses the desires of objects to many. The commentary goes like this. Nityaha, the indestructible, Nityanam among the destructible, Chetaha, consciousness, Chetanam among the conscious, among the manifestations of consciousness, such as the living creatures. Living creatures now beginning with what? You see, the modern theory of evolution doesn't postulate where this all came from. How, from a chemical arrangement and chemical combinations in the Earth's atmosphere and crust, did some conscious living organism, and we can use these as alternative terms. Something that is living is something that is conscious. When we use the term jiva, we're meaning something that is conscious, something that responds, and something that reacts, something that has a sense of individuality, a sense of self-awareness. But we can hardly say that a plant is devoid of all these things. It was the great Jagadish Chandra Bose, the great friend of Sister Nivedita. She wrote most of his papers for him, who did this enormous research about the feelingness, the sensitivity of plants. And now, of course, we find people quite willing to accept such a thing. We have a living example of it. Sri Ramakrishna could hardly walk on grass. When he did so, he felt the pain of the grass. That sensitivity was within him. So the whole of what we call life, from plant life to bacterial life, microorganismic life, to the complex association of multiple cells that we call the human body and the human person. All of this, where did it arise from? Of course, this is a great question. It's a great difficulty for biology trying to create some conditions for life has not resulted in anything positive. Strands of RNA and so on and so forth reproduced, but you require some primordial material. There's an old, of course, joke about that man comes to God and says, aha, I'm also very clever. I know how you did this creation. Oh, please tell me. Well, he says, first you take mud. Ah, says the Lord, please get your own mud. So you see, we can't find an origin of an origin of an origin. Some foundation has to be there. And we don't begin with this world or this earth. We don't begin with bacteria. No, there's a hierarchical order of unfoldment and evolution. And so when we go back, it says, beginning with Brahma, that is, beginning with a cosmic movement, beginning with a mind. In Hindu mythology, all the boons that are granted, all the characters in the Hindu mythology are all granted by Brahma. Why is that? It's because there's only one cosmic mind operating. This whole universe is just an unfoldment, an evolution, not from some primordial substance, not some from organic material where carbon gets introduced. No, it comes from Brahma, from a divine mind somewhere. As it is owing to the fire that water, etc., that are not fire come to be possessed of the power to burn. Similarly, says the commentator, the power to manifest consciousness that is seen in others is owing to the consciousness of the self. And besides, he is the omniscient Lord, knows every corner, knows everything. And Yaha Ekaha, who alone, Vidarati, arranges diversely, that is, dispenses without effort, common, desirable things, the fruits of work according to merit, as also out of his own grace. You're not saying don't take the fruits of your actions. He's saying, please take it, but attribute it to the correct dispenser. Bahunam, of many of the desirous worldly people, those discriminating people who realize him in their hearts, for them, shantihi, cessation of disturbance, peace, is shashvati, eternal. For them accrues peace, that is their very self. And na itaresham, not for others, because others are a different sort. They look at things in a different way. Now then the question arises, how shall I know that supreme? Having known this world and this earth, and even theoretically the principles that operate within it, how shall I know that supreme? You'll know it when there's a sense of supreme bliss that comes in, which they realize directly as this, an aha moment of realization. Ah, that is it. Is it self-effulgent? Does it shine distinctly or does it not? When that is known, ah, this is self-effulgent. It doesn't require another thing to light it. I found an origin that gives life and light and love by itself. That shining, all things shine, is a beautiful statement that comes up in the context of this Katha Upanishad. So let us go on with the passage and see how it looks. So we go on to the 14th. Tadetad iti manyanti nidesham paramam sukham katam na nu tad vijaniyam kimu bhati vibhati va. So does the Supreme shine in himself, or does he shine in his expression? The next stanza will tell us, na tatra surya bhati, na chandra tarakam, nema vidyatu banti kutoya agnihi. Tam eva bantam, this beautiful phrase. Tam eva bantam anubhati sarvam. That shining, all things shine. Tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. This shining, the sun shines not there, nor the moon and the stars. Previously used an example. Looking at the sun, seeing its qualities of omnipresence, where its rays reach every corner. Seeing that it knows every corner. See that is a life giver. Seeing that we cannot manage without its light. The wonderful dialogue which is there in the Katha Upanishad with Yajnavalkya and Janaka. Tell me, when a person, by what light does a person work and move and walk? And Yajnavalkya, in a humorous mood, says, well, it's surely the sun. Yes, but when the sun is gone, well, then it's the moon. Yes, but when the moon is gone, then it's the stars. Yes, but when the sun and moon are gone, it ends up, the senses. But when the senses also have set, then it is the self. That's the answer. So the sun shines not there, nor the moon, nor the stars. These lightnings shine not. Where then could this fire be? Everything shines only after that shining light. His shining illumines all this world. What a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful statement that is. Now the Supreme is, of course, the source of all light and therefore life. The master of light, all our seeing, cannot be known by any earthly light. Our knowledge cannot find him out. And this is reflected, of course, in passages in other Upanishads. It's also reflected in the Bhagavad Gita in the 15th chapter. And you see the symbol of light is the most natural and the universal. In fact, the philosopher Plato, in his 7th letter, compares the sudden inspiration of the mystic to a leaping spark. And in the midst of the cave, which is so famous, the real world is a realm of light outside the cave. Even in the Jewish tradition, Zoroastrian traditions, the religions speak the antagonism between this light and darkness. And we hazard a guess that during the Babylonian captivity, this emphasis from the Zoroastrian tradition came through into the Jewish tradition. In John's epistle, we read, God is light and in him is no darkness at all. So this brings us now to the second part of this Katha Upanishad. And this is where we see the whole description of the evolutionary process. What is the evidence for the Supreme? You just have to look at the world itself and then take a devolutionary path and go back to its more subtle components until you find what is the origin. You may think we have done this, but it's worth laboring the point because now we come across this great analogy of a tree. We can think of it as a beginningless and endless tree. Let us take a sacred tree with the sacred leaves, the people tree. And in the example, it has the roots above and the branches below. In other words, the Supreme, there's a descent, an evolutionary descent. And just as you would see in a cotton tree, say, that the cotton is evidence of some root. When you look at a tree, you don't suspect that there's a root there. It's all hidden under the ground. But the root is there, and without the root, there's no tree. So what are we rooted in? That's the investigation. Ardhva mulo vak saka. Esha satas sanatanaha. Tadeva shukram tad brahma. Tad evamratam uchyate. Tasmin logaha shritaha sarve tad u natyati. Kashchana etad vaitat. The same formula is being followed. Etad vaitat. This is that. The whole of these passages are ended with that useful phrase. This is that. So this is the beginningless people tree that has its roots above and branches below. And we see the closeness of the Katha Upanishad with the Bhagavad Gita, because this example is also used there. That which is its root is pure, that is Brahman, that is called immortal. On that are fixed all the worlds, and none transcends that. And this truly is that. Now it's worth looking at the commentary here from Shankaracharya. So let us have a look at this. It's a whole meditation. You see, apart from delivering the principles of the Supreme, it's now giving us scope to sit down and visualize. Let us take this whole cosmos. Now we have a much broader view and deeper view of what constitutes the universe today. A mere 100 or so years ago, we never thought that there was anything beyond this Milky Way. And the Milky Way can be seen by the naked eye. Now when we take the observations from astronomical observation points, telescopes, enormous telescopes, placed in such environments as the Atacama Desert, or placed in Antarctica, where there is no tainting from the lights of the sky. The sky now can be seen in its pristine beauty without any obstructions. Seeing this Milky Way with the naked eye, it was obviously assumed that's all we have here. And it is vast, there's no doubt about it. But then you see, by this time in the last century, we were able to observe not just one of these galaxies, but many, so that we know in the observable universe something like the magic figure of 100 billion such galaxies. And we can say even more. And the more we look into the space, at the moment we have launched the James Webb telescope, which is able to see further than we have ever seen before, stretching back to primitive light. And what is the surprise? Well, the surprise is that even at something like a billion light years away, there is still vast galaxies spanning 3 billion light years across, challenging our conventional idea of the cosmological models that we have. We don't know the extent of it. We can use the term infinite, but we have no idea. We can't even conceive of the vastness of the space. Now, supposing you are able to think of it as a vast tree with branches everywhere, the next question then is, can we go backwards to more and more subtle elements and see where is the root of this? Where is the origin of this? How does this arise? And then we can use our imagination to fill in the gaps. Let us have a look. So, Urdhva Mulaha, that which has its root above, the root that is the state of the Supreme Vishnu. Vishnu means that which is pervading everywhere. In fact, it is the entire of this existence that I've just described. As far as we look, we will find the dark skin of Vishnu everywhere. So this tree of the world comprising everything from what? The unmanifested. Actually, if it's unmanifest, you can't trace it. To the immovables, has its root above. It is called vriksha, is a highly technical term. Vriksha is a technical term because the root meaning of it is the thing that can be chopped down. This whole universe, no matter how vast, can be chopped down completely. And in our own world, it happens. It consists of many aberrations, such as birth, old age, death, sorrow, etc. And it changes itself every moment. It would be an impossible universe if we didn't have some kind of patterns that had a changing characteristic. Supposing the sun doesn't shine one day. The fact that it shines one day, the fact that it goes into decline, as it were, in the evening, that reincarnates in the morning, The fact that breathing is, the fact that there are patterns, observable patterns in the universe, gives us every reason for two things. Firstly, to observe the changing nature of what we observe, but secondly, the influence of the unchanging which is there. And so this characteristic of the world is not only that it has a rhythm to it, has a pattern to it, therefore has a mathematical structure to it, but that it is not only changing, but it is also finite. There's a great debate in science when you look out in the universe and we discuss, is it infinite or finite? Somehow people are saying it's flat and it's infinite. But we know it's finite because we can only observe some 15 billion years away or light years away, 15 billion years, because we have a speed limit in our observation. The speed of light, we can't see anything beyond that. And therefore, that presents to us a finite border beyond which we cannot see, giving rise to the term observable universe. So this border is finite, and everything that we see is finite. You must have noticed. So it changes itself every moment, inasmuch as no sooner as it is seen that it is destroyed. Like magic. In magic, something appears, something disappears. I find great joy in taking some coins and showing young children, look, 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 and something appears, and something disappears. A few weeks ago now, I did it with some cards. A youngster who was very interested in learning conjuring and magic and so on said, I've learned a card trick. And unbeknown to him, I managed to secrete one card and made it suddenly appear. And the look on his face was worth the whole thing. Such an amazed look. But I had to be honest and say, by the way, this is nothing supernatural about this or about me. This is a trick, and this is what we call magic, and this is what we call Maya. Water in a mirage, in a city in the sky, etc. And it ceases to exist ultimately. Just like a tree, it's without any hard wood like the stem of a plantain tree. It is subject to hundreds of doubts in the minds of skeptics. Its reality is determined in its true color by the seekers of truth, says the commentary. Or, of course, according to another reading, its nature cannot be fixed as such and such by the seekers of truth. Its essence lies where? In its root, the supreme Brahman ascertained in the Vedanta. Shankaracharya continues, it grows from out of the seed of ignorance. What is the seed? The superimposition that we put on it. Desire, action, and the unmanifested comes out from there. It has for its sprout what we previously found. Whole of existence is described as from Brahma to a clump of grass. Now it tells us the different term, Hiranyagarbha. That is from a womb, from a subtle womb, from a golden seed. The inferior Brahman, that is Brahman that is manifest as a potential creative platform, comprising the two powers of knowledge and action. It has for its trunk the diverse, subtle bodies of all creatures. Its vigor of growth results from the sprinkling of the water of desire. How do we keep this tree going? Desire makes it. It has for its tender sprouts the objects of the senses of knowledge. Its leaves are what? Its leaves are the Vedas, the Smritis, all the scriptures, all the manual textbooks on how to conduct your life, and other things, logic, learning, and instruction. In other words, what is modern science investigating in its scientific endeavors? It's investigating this tree. It's investigating the tree that can be cut down and that changes. It's investigating Maya. For this reason, it finds itself in a position of inscrutability. Its lovely flowers, what would they represent? These are the many deeds, such as sacrifice, good deeds. These are the flowers, these are the merits that you accumulate according to the law of causality. And then charity, austerity, etc. Its various tastes are the experience of happiness and sorrow. Its infinite fruits are the means of subsistence of beings. It has its secondary roots well developed, entwined and firmly fixed through a sprinkling of the water of desire for these fruits. Not only giving you a principle, as I say, but you can sit and you can meditate on this quite happily. It has for its nests the 7 worlds. There are 7 worlds, beginning from the one called Satyaloka. Satyaloka, there are 7 worlds, there are 14 worlds. So 7 are progressive worlds. And the other worlds are 7 regressive worlds. And from that one Satya built by the birds, which are the living beings from Brahma, again the Saranyagarbha, downwards, it has its uproar rendered tumultuous through the various sounds arising from dancing, singing, instrumental music, disport, that is play, jest, etc., clapping on the arms, laughing, pulling, crying, exclaiming, alas, alas. Now we come to the relevance of today's poem. Should we clap our hands? So just to remind you, what if the world is a circus ring where we clowns go tumbling? But why do we behave as such? Because we love to tumble much. Alas, alas, leave me, induced by mirth and grief arising from the enjoyment and pain of living beings. And it is felt how? By the weaponry of detachment. Bhagavad Gita tells us the same thing. Consisting, what is this detachment? It is not withdrawing into an impersonal, unfeeling aspect. It consists of the realization of the identity of Brahman and the self as inculcated by Vedanta. What is this detachment? It consists of a realization. It's a positive movement, not a negative movement. It means realization and attachment actually on the other side of the identity of this Brahman, that is the roots, and the self as inculcated by Vedanta that says this self and this Brahman is the same entity. This tree of the world is Ashwataha. Its nature is ever unsteady. And like the people tree, shaken as it is by the wind of desires and deeds, it is avakshakaha, downwards are its branches, consisting of all these things: post-mortem condition, heaven, hell, the states of beasts, states of ghosts. This gives scope for many, many different varieties of parallel universes, other beings in other dimensions and conditions of subtlety. It is Sanatana, is existing from time immemorial, having no beginning. This is a very different cosmological model. This Big Bang cosmology postulates a creation event, and scientists waggle their fingers when they describe it. It is the basis for theological discussions that evoke a creator and a being at the beginning. But actually, the creative aspect of it is part and parcel of it. And so it goes on, ever. Tadeva, that very thing, which is the root of the tree of the world, is Shukram, white, pure, resplendent, being in reality the light of the self, which is consciousness. Tat Brahma, that is Brahman, being the greatest of all. Tad Eva, that indeed, Uchyate, is called Amritam, indestructible by nature, being true. All else is false, being mutable, existing as mere name, dependent on speech. And hence, it is mortal. I'll finish off by reading the rest of this commentary. Tasmin on him, on Brahman, that is absolutely true. Sarve all. Lokaha, the worlds which are comparable to a city in the sky or water in a mirage, and which vanish on the realization of the supreme truth. That's why we know that it is not a permanent entity, because it vanishes on the realization of the truth. And so there is no modification that transcends this, because that Brahman, just as the products like pot, etc., do not transcend their material. A pot is made from clay. It was clay. It is clay. It will always be clay. And this is that. Now, it may be said that the very root of the world, that is Brahman, by realizing which it is stated that people become immortal, actually does not exist. There are schools of thought which say that there is a nihilistic aspect to this, that when you eliminate all the changing, there's nothing, emptiness, shunyata, and that this universe has emerged out of nothing. But this is wrong. And the next stanza will explain why that is told, and we'll pick this up next week. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace beyond all.